Hello, everyone. Welcome to day one of Philippine Startup Week. We're excited to be the last slot of the day. Hopefully, you guys had an awesome previous speakers and had a lot of fun during this whole first day. First of all, I want to thank Kubo for helping us organize all of this event. Same of DOST, DTI, DCIT, and all the community partners that have been part of this awesome event. It's going to be a very interesting week. We're thrilled as Draper Startup House to be part of this week. My name is Christian Munoz. I'm leading Draper Startup House team here in Manila. We're a global community of entrepreneurs, founders, investors, utilizing physical spaces, hotels around the world to enable 1 million entrepreneurs by 2030, which is our mission. So today's panel is going to be a lot more about investors and the whole scene post and during this whole COVID pandemic. And then I have here Juliana, who will be helping me host this panel, who is head of ventures, Drip Startup House Ventures. So Juliana, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks so much, Christian. This is quite a cool platform. So I'm Juliana. I'm from Draper Startup House as well, on the venture side of things. So Draper Startup House Ventures was born off the back of entrepreneurial hospitality, which is what Christian here is the backbone of in Manila specifically. So what Draper Startup House Ventures aims to do is connect founders to global investment opportunities around the world. Once we became part of the Draper family, it gave us access to 23 global funds of the Draper name, as well as our many more partners, most of which who are on the call tonight, who we send deals to for any of the founders and startups that come through our space. And so a big part of this also is including, the local initiatives and governments such as Kubo, MDEC, that we take great pride in having partners with and putting on pitch events, and otherwise, helping the founder in Manila have access to capital that they otherwise would have never seen or known to be connected to. So we have a pretty great panel with us. So I'll go ahead and let's introduce John to the stage from Funderbeam.
Hi everyone, my name is Jen. I'm the investment manager from Funderbeam. So I look out for companies to invest in. Funderbeam is a stock exchange for startups. So we help with funding and trading of shares in startups. We have a community of investors that co-invest with VCs, and we love to support growth companies. Typically, I look at pre-Series A to Series B companies. So I'm very excited to participate today.
Awesome. Next, I think, let's bring on Nadia from Gobi.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Nadia from Gobi Partners. We are a Pan-Asia venture capital started in China. So we have a double headquarter, China and Kuala Lumpur. So in Philippines itself, we actually invested in 3 companies, and one of the recent one is actually Kumu.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nadia. How about RJ from Monksville?
Great. Thanks, Juliana. Hi, everyone. My name is RJ from Monksville Ventures. We're a Southeast Asian-based venture capital focused primarily on the early stage, specifically on the Series A space. So we invest in anywhere in the tech realm. We have invested all globally, but we do have a focus of Southeast Asia and founders from Southeast Asia as well. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, RJ. Next, why don't we go ahead and do Uniel from the Ventures Co.
Hi, I'm Uniel from the Ventures, and the Ventures is whole-based early stage focused venture capital and accelerator, and we are also operating Impact Collective, which is a new initiative of collective investment, like community-driven investment initiative, with co-hosted with Citypreneur, the UFNA, World Federation of the UN, and other Vietnam and Singapore, Thailand partners who actually run the program together, focusing on Southeast Asia and a wider Asia Pacific region as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Next, why don't we go ahead and do James from Repra?
Thanks, Juliana. Hi, I'm James. I'm from Repra. Prior to Repra, I was an angel investor with a portfolio focusing actually on Southeast Asia, especially the Philippines. and the United States. And joining Repra, we built a venture builder that focuses primarily in Southeast Asia with some business in Japan. And so we too also have some portfolio companies in the Philippines, focusing on pre-seed and seed companies and helping wannabe founders ideate and build their businesses with a longer term horizon for sustainable businesses down the line.
Awesome. Thanks so much, James. And last but not least, our lovely Simin, who is a little bit of has a different perspective, I'd say.
Hi, yes, indeed. Hi, everyone. I'm Simin and I'm from Light of Hope PH. I'm the co-founder there. We are a social enterprise that focuses on providing energy and Wi-Fi access to families who are currently living off the grid in the Philippines. So super delighted to be here on the demand side with all the investors. So it's really great. Prior to this, I was actually at a corporate venture builder. So we built startups for large corporates. And right before that, as a management consultant at BCG, who launched the BCG FinTech Control Tower practice. So coming out with a lot of hats, but finally joining the founder's role now, and super exciting. Lovely to be here.
All right, thanks so much, Simin. I believe that makes everybody. So now bringing them all on stage. Christian, if you want to go ahead and start with the first question. And also one last thing, thanks for all joining us, all of our speakers, and special shout out to the Impact Collective for viewing the session as well. Off to you, Christian.
Yeah, well, thank you guys. Thank you all for being here. So I think, when we first were talking about the Philippine Startup Week and just, when we started Draper Startup House in the Philippines, we noticed the access to capital was one of the major concerns that founders and entrepreneurs had here. So that's why we're super excited to bring the Draper Startup House Ventures and, having this panel with you guys. So I want you guys to maybe just bring the most value to our audience here in the Philippines. So what do you guys think is what you guys seen so far that's been the major challenges that you've seen in pre-COVID or like during COVID and post-COVID scene in terms of investing in the Philippines, which is obviously pretty much what our audience is looking to know and connect with you guys. So I guess maybe we'll start with you, James. You mentioned you had a venture builder also already investing here in the Philippines.
Right. So I do think that there is some correlation between a market's ability to manage the crisis on a macro level and investment. But I don't have enough data to make that conclusion. So for example, the confidence to invest in Vietnam hasn't dwindled that much, partly because the confidence to invest in a government that seems like it's had a lot of control was I guess maintained even pre-COVID to the second quarter of the year. In the Philippines, it's a bit of a strange situation, I suppose, because there's also not that much information for people on the outside to be able to determine what's going on, other than the fact that there are a lot of legacy deals that were made through 2020. So I know, very generally speaking, the Philippines has a smaller piece of the pie in terms of venture capital coming into 2020. But there was still a deal that closed in the second quarter. I think Voyager got some venture capital money. So those who are supporting PayMaya and things that are supporting the fintech system it's still a positive, right? I mean, the deal didn't break down. So there might be some correlation, but maybe it's too early to tell whether there would be residual negative effects from the ability to manage a crisis and continuing investor confidence.
Right. What about your experience, RJ? I know you guys also had a couple of investments here, I believe, SipMatch and other ones in the past. So have you seen sort of like any major changes in the market post and pre-COVID? And what do you see like the Philippines startups? What's the potential do you see?
Great question, Christian. I think definitely we've seen a lot of progress, a lot of development within the tech ecosystem, even the likes of accelerators and VCs who are visiting. I mean, right now we can only count the number of local VCs with our fingers, but we can see this number growing. Right now, it's an upward trend, which is great. A lot of people, especially in this call as well, who are looking actively in the Philippines, find a lot of good startups nowadays. For the likes of Kumu with Gobi and everyone else as well. So I think for the past couple of years, what I've seen is the entrepreneurship spirit has definitely gone up. back in the day, a lot of the young Filipinos would rather go corporate. But now with this huge spark in entrepreneurship, unicorns being formed in the region and even around the world, all these great stories, right? It definitely giving a lot of edge and also a lot of confidence for these young folk to start building their own companies now, which I'm very excited to see moving forward as well.
Right. Yeah, I think it's exciting times. I definitely see a lot of new things happening and being forced to be more digital. In line with that, Gian, have you guys? What's your perspective on the Philippines in terms of the potential?
Yeah, I think Philippines is very exciting. I can really speak more from the investor point of view. I see a lot more family offices kind of like formalizing their investment process into startups. And I think what people realize during this COVID is that some investors will close their purses and some will continue investing. So it's a realization that funding is really continuous in Southeast Asia. So this is slightly different from experiences in the US, right, where you fundraise for 18 months, then you focus on your business. In Southeast Asia, I think like there are a lot more follow-on investors than lead investors, and people are ready to pull the trigger at different times. So that means like the flow of capital will be kind of continuous as well. But of course, like with more action from Gobi partners, Mangsil and Ripra and other VCs, there's always we'll have a more robust funding system. So that's great.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we need to get to do this more often, and you guys get to come to Draper Saddle House Manila, so you can have like this live hopefully soon. Nadia, that's super amazing that you guys were part of the Kumu deal. This is a very exciting company. I think Roland and the rest of the guys have been putting like a very interesting company and like great timing. Can you maybe share a little bit more on that? And like obviously this was a very interesting live streaming sort of like potential during this pandemic. Also challenging because in the Philippines the internet penetration is not that big, so it was a little bit challenging to hear like this live stream sort of platform like being as successful as it is.
Yeah, I think like that's a great question as well. I mean, like Philippines itself, it's actually the same with like Southeast Asia, right? Like all the deals are actually been slow in the early part of this year, but it's actually just kind of like increasing in the later part of the year. And Kumu is also kind of like I think a great example for this as well, because I think because of the COVID situation, like all of the there are certain verticals that actually get highlighted, like the Kumu live streaming media as well, everything that's actually very digital and consumer, also like food as well, right? But then there are also like certain sectors that are actually getting hit pretty bad, like property, travel. So I think that kind of like really picture what's happening. But I think like in the Philippines itself, it's actually very interesting because there are a lot of really good like early deals that's actually happening, right? So we saw like there are also like bigger deals, like First Circle that actually had like a pretty big round sometime like last year or 2 years ago. But we also see that it's actually a potential, but we just have to wait. It's just pretty bad that this year actually got hit by COVID. So we just need to wait a bit more. But we actually seen like Kumu actually raise a big round and also PayMongo as well. So it's actually on the right track.
Yeah, absolutely. So Emil, how are you? Can you share a little bit more of your experience so far in the Philippines and in the region, and obviously like the situation right now with the pandemic, and where do you see the market going, and have you seen new trends from the Philippines, or new deals coming from the Philippines to your desk, and something exciting going on there?
Yeah, but I mean, before starting the comments, like I should admit that I'm kind of new for Philippine market, especially for the startup ecosystem and investment activities. But yeah, this year we actually started looking actively, the early stage startups from Philippines and other Southeast East Asia. Rather than the Singapore and Vietnam and some of more comfortable countries that we looked at. from previous years. So, but definitely, I see a lot of activities are going right now because the Impact Collective among short list of over 200 startups, we had at least we had over 10 to 12% of Filipino startups coming in. So it was quite a big number considering that we have over 30 different countries coming into the program. So I think that tells us that the Philippine ecosystem of the startups is very active and the vibe is really good too. And from the sector wise, it was pretty diversified from healthcare to marketplace and financial services and some of the COVID-19 solutions as well. So I was very surprised when I actually firstly met those founders through our program and the interviews to select the final participants of the program. So one thing I really find interesting is that before the COVID, a lot of platform players, online based platform players worked really in a fast speed, but then here during the COVID situation, the new solutions like remote working or new economics and those kind of rising sectors are having a big push and big potentials. So and also the investment activities are not that slowed down even during this lockdown period. So I think this is not a kind of like a negative effect, but have more potentials, especially for these emerging markets in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for all that information. So Simin, tell us a little bit more. I know you come from both sides, right? A little more corporate experience, and also like as an entrepreneur. You launched Light of Hope in the Philippines. You actually reached out to us a couple of months ago, right, to help you establish and do the whole setup in the Philippines. So obviously, COVID, I guess, like affected you when you were not able to fly into Manila to the Philippines, right? And also affected because you've been managing all remotely, right? But you still managed to launch and still managed to be managing your
Yeah,
company from Singapore.
I think it's an interesting story about what the sectors that survive pre-COVID, post-COVID, and how the mentality has changed. We provide energy and Wi-Fi access to families living off the grid, and it's actually a COVID was in fact a green shoot event for us because we always knew that there are families without access to energy, families because they don't have access to energy doesn't have access to Wi-Fi. But it was during COVID when schools are moving online, work's moving online, telehealth, medication, everything of your life has to be executed online, that the world start to realize that the social divide starts to widen so much more. Like, look, great, there's a lot of digital innovation that's happening, but as long as you don't get access to Wi-Fi and don't get access to energy, um, you can't reach the communities that are there. So we eventually, I mean, what's really interesting for us is that we haven't even gotten our company registered in Philippines because it was going to take so long to get there, and we're still stuck, trying to get that application going. So we've got contracts, we've got people saying, hey, let us fund your pilot contract. We have two actually over 3 months, and we had to sign them in Singapore because it was so much easier. It took a day to set up in Singapore. So there are a lot of challenges, especially for an early stage startup for like us trying to operate during COVID when everything's locked down. You don't know. One day Cebu's open, next day Cebu's closed, and it just changes by the week. So we have to be super agile and adapt to it. If I take on a little bit of the corporate venture builder head when we are working with large corporates, especially in Southeast Asia, when you've got huge family conglomerates that's owning the space, what it really is going to be helpful for startups like ourselves is that to have VCs who are willing to fund the ecosystem before, otherwise a lot of us will just, once we get to a certain level of skill, A round, you get absorbed by the large corporates because you can't compete, right? It's just a sheer scale perspective. So Philippines is a really interesting market because the market opportunity and the market is ripe for so many reasons. But then there are infrastructural regulations and resources challenge for founders like ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a longer process, but it's a bigger opportunity, right? Like it's just a little bit painful in the beginning for founders and Filipino and even foreign founders to navigate this whole bureaucracy. I mean, hopefully, this whole digital world that we live now will help accelerate those processes and make it a lot more seamless. Uh, Juliana, so I know you also been sending investors a lot of good decks and good companies. So why don't you also share a little bit more like what you've seen in ventures and maybe lead the next set of questions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's really interesting about, DSH Ventures' role in this ecosystem is, we're not a fund, but because of that, we see a lot of deals in a lot of different geographies, and we sort of understand investor appetite on like broadly every end of the spectrum, from an ideation stage company all the way to, a Series C. And so I think actually we have a pretty good insight into who's investing, what are people investing in. But I just personally, from all of you, kind of wanted to hear, like COVID-19 has mostly dramatically changed the way we work and how we live, and how we communicate with one another on all levels of the spectrum. Like Impact Collective is a virtual incubator accelerator type situation where I know Reaper has invested in really early ideation stage companies, which, I know that you guys also have a very, very intense diligence process of interviewing the founder, which has dramatically changed, I'm sure, like across the board. So I just kind of wanted to know beyond, what you guys have experienced in Manila, in the entire Southeast Asian ecosystem, what are the trends that you've seen this year in regard to industry specific? What are you guys as a firm, as an exchange, as an accelerator, as a founder? What are you guys investing in currently? Have you guys transitioned your strategies from any parts of Southeast Asia? How have you guys pivoted each of your more or less thesis? And I know that the question is a little bit different for Simon, so I'll ask it a little bit differently. If you've been fundraising, or have you been fundraising, what does that look like when you're approaching these? Have you included the COVID clauses? So what does it look like when you approach for funding, Simon?
Sorry, my mic was off. So yeah, we are really early. So we incorporated a company in June, and incorporated because we've got clients, and so we started having the fundraising conversation. Thankfully, during the since last month, we were part of the Answer program, and that business pivots by the day. So what COVID has helped us validate was actually this huge digital ecosystem that we can now bring to the rural communities. Pre-COVID, anyone who is living in the rural communities could go to the shama or the doctor down the road, get medication, go to the pharmacy. But during a period of lockdown, and the worst thing is that the lockdown period is so far extended that nobody expected that to be the case, especially in Cebu. A lot of investors, especially impact investors, have started to see that there is a real need and there is a viable business model to be had, because we were primarily hardware, right? If you try and sell hardware to a VC, pretty much the door shuts very quickly. But now we're looking at ourselves as a technology platform, as a platform that could be the digital ecosystem services for the rural communities. So people embedding education modules onto our platform, and through the Wi-Fi that we have, they get access to education. So that number of use cases it has truly exploded for us during COVID, mostly because investors start to see that there is a real need, and the future post COVID, in the new normal, you would have people adopting digital technology as well. When in the past, it's going to take so much education and so much awareness to sell someone something that they don't have, and they probably think they don't need. And now this has become a need, and they're more aware of, hey, all the benefits they get from being part of the digital world. So it's really interesting for us that COVID has really helped us to change and pivot very quickly,
Yeah, I
and
mean,
with a lot
it's
of
really
help
quite.
from investors as well.
Yeah, no, and I think more than anything, it's been a time where a lot of the startups and founders that we've been working with are raising bridge rounds, and it's really life or death for a lot of these startups, especially at the early stages. Especially if they've had some F&F round or a small angel round where if the VC can't reinvest in their portco, it's pivot or die. And I think it's pretty unfortunate, but you really do see sort of the dichotomy of interest between those that are growing and succeeding because of the pandemic that are otherwise thriving that maybe they wouldn't have versus those who are now fairly stagnant. So I'm just going to go backwards from the order that Christian went in. So I think Yunel from the Impact Collective, you guys are doing a virtual accelerator more or less. So what does that look like? How else has your thesis changed prior from the pre-COVID to now the during COVID, because we're not really post yet. So.
Thank you. Yeah, well, Impact Collective is kind of like a experiment for us, and this actually brought us a kind of like a concept of platform investment and community-driven investment, which is not requiring us going everywhere to do the due diligence and meet the founders face to face, but more like the communities of our partner investment organizations and some ESOs. They actually at the local level, they help us to do this all kind of like due diligence and the acceleration part together with us, 100% remotely, and we created this beautiful online platform on by on, and we had this kind of like a long-term view. So at some point, the handful of partners of the venture capital house is kind of like a limited resources. So we cannot access to a lot of different deals, and we cannot actually be the expert of everywhere, right? But then to scale up the investment activities and to scale the startup ecosystem, we thought we need to build a platform, and that automatically those platform actually verifies and do the diligence, and also even after investment activities, we can still follow on the supportings and other additional investment activities, or those kind of holistic community-based supports that we can provide. But then this COVID situation actually accelerated that phase, so we quickly moved on to the platform side, and then built and finalized some of the structure from January to March, and then opened the program from May, and the main round just started from this September. And this year it was really quite a very, very a lot of exciting news is actually happening. So this year we hit the highest point of investment activities. So even so far during the 3 quarters, we made over 25 different investments mainly in Southeast Asia. So 30 to 40% from Vietnam, and 10 to 20% from Philippines, and another portfolios like Bangladesh, and other countries that we actually couldn't look into specifically. Actually, we could get this kind of a lot of opportunities through this platform play. So this is kind of a new perspective and paradigm changer for us. So we opened up our deals, and we opened up our resources, and we opened up all our networks. And then usually people think doing that is kind of what can I say, suicide kind of deal, right? Yeah. But then it actually helped us back, and our firm right now having 2 different funds out of this spring of the Impact Collective, and the portfolio diversification was really, really great, and the new deal opportunities with the survivors. So that means that we can see how resilient the company is, the startup is. And also, I mean, this is our chance, but a bit of a bit of apologies, but we have more, what can I say, better positions, especially for the valuation side and the, you know, the the positions that we can invest in. So definitely a lot of, you know, opportunities are wide open for the investor side. So that is why still, you know, we see the activities are not going down, but more like, you know, get hyped.
Yeah, I think, well, a great point to that is, you know, I think it has changed in terms of sped up a lot of the activity in terms of, you know, the DocuSign. I mean, I'm no longer taking coffee meetings, but I can have 4 more meetings in the time that it would have taken me to commute there and back.
Right.
So I think in a lot of ways it has transitioned, you know, like the effectiveness of, you know, helping more people in a smaller amount of time. And I think people are also changing a little bit how, you know, they refer people and they're more willing to lend an ear and to better help the companies, you know, not only in their portfolios, but those who are, you know, looking for funding in other ways as well. So thank you for that insight. And I honestly forgot the order that Christian previously went. So I'm just going to go in order on my screen. James, you know, how has that changed for you? How has, you know, this COVID time changed the way that you guys operate at Repra? Any major differences in the conversations, the industries that you guys are looking into?
Sure. I think the first thing that we did was that we actually doubled down our attention on our existing portfolio. So unlike some other investors, I think some of you who've engaged us know that we spend a lot of time supporting our founders. And so what we did was we looked at what our existing portfolio needed in terms of survival, in terms of how their P&L was panning out through these quarters. We actually took some of those learnings to understand and maybe influence our investment decisions for 2020. And so there was this back and forth conversation of how we were supporting our portfolio and how we were looking at our sourcing strategy. And you know, to be honest, we realized that our sourcing strategy and the velocity to which we were, I guess, looking to add more companies in our portfolio and invest for 2020, it really wasn't affected so much in hindsight based on COVID. Meaning we actually really deliberately wanted to talk to founders more and more about their true motivations to start up a company. So for example, we spent the past few months experimenting in our version of like a founder in residence. We called it founder internship. And the reason why we used intern, which sounds a bit off, is because we actually get them to do some of the stuff we were doing by supporting other founders or even getting founder wannabes to look for other founders for us. So they were kind of working for us, but at the same time, we were helping to build their company, you know, by working closely with other members of our team. So it was this weird kind of organic, you know, interplay between how we were supporting our existing portfolio and how we were kind of just intentionally slowing down the number of investments coming in. And I don't think Repra from a quantitative perspective should be an indicator of investor confidence as it would be influenced by COVID, because it really, we're not a fund, right? I mean, we don't have LPs to, you know, to speak to with respect to velocity and numbers by a certain period. So in that sense, we should actually look at it as a positive, that this was a period for us to be a bit more introspective, both in the way we support and both in the way that we source moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's because I mean, as many of the VC partners and, you know, the accelerators and the incubators, I think, you know, I've known Repra to have the most founder oriented approach. So I think that's pretty cool in the sense that, you know, you guys were able to take a standpoint and to look at, you know, like let's reinvest in the companies that we already have and double down on, you know, sort of the intentions of those that are applying and are seeking to start companies. So I think that's very, very insightful. So thank you. And Gian, I know that you also don't have a traditional structure. I don't know particularly what you call them. I guess they're members on your platform, a little bit different than a traditional LP. But has COVID changed, you know, the appetite of what they want to see on the platform, of what people the angels are investing in, or members, whatever you guys call your group. So how has it changed for you?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things is like during this period, I think startups that do very well are those who engage their user base and their customers to give feedback to the business. So kind of like startups that actively create a virtuous cycle of feedback and improvement, right? And kind of like align those users and ambassadors or enthusiasts to also invest in the startups, because these are the most passionate people for the startup, and they would talk about the startup. So I did notice a bit of a movement where founders say, let's open up a small round to let these enthusiasts and ambassadors invest in the startups alongside the VC. So kind of like fundamentally, we operate in a very synergistic space with the VCs, where we bring something a bit different to the table. I think there's a bit of similarities with equity crowdfunding, but it comes with the territory. So what Funderbeam has done really well is we help founders create a small syndicate for these passionate investors to co-invest. And Funderbeam keeps the cap table really clean because there's only one shareholder on the table. So we've done this for a lot of consumer brands. We've done it for consumer-facing startups, like even AR VR companies. That I found to be a very interesting segment, especially during this COVID time. I think there's a fundamental shift online. There's also a lot of development in a digital space, so cloud graphics, and all these creates a lot of excitement and growth in this AR VR space. So that's one part that I look at as well. But yeah, overall, Funderbeam, we help founders in a different way. There's a synergistic with more institutional VCs.
I was muted. My apologies. And I think it's really quite interesting how Funderbeam engages their specific community, and I guess for the non-traditional structure, sort of more or less allows you guys to highlight a new crowd of the AR, the digital wave of companies who might be doing something different during this time, which also I guess sort of coincides with the investor appetite as well. So RJ, I know that as I understand it, our Monks Hill is a little bit more of a traditional structure of a fund. So in terms of what you guys are seeing, what you guys are sourcing, what you guys are investing in, has there been any pressure on the LP side to diversify or change? Sort of how have you guys shifted your strategy since this mayhem began?
Sure. No, definitely there is some pressure from the LPs. They're pinging us more often now, saying, "Hey, what's our strategy here? Are we going to do more LP support? Are we going to do more portfolio support? How's your deal sourcing?" And hopefully, I can kind of simplify what we've done in the past 10 months. Working essentially just from my room all these months. But essentially, we like to categorize kind of the different verticals and buckets. So I want to kind of break down the verticals that we look at. So typically we're pretty agnostic. We look at anything and everything in the tech realm. But during COVID, we noticed that, of course, there are some verticals doing well, some verticals who are just doing okay, and some who are kind of suffering due to market conditions and all of the above. So sort of like the good buckets would be like e-commerce, logistics, anything that's still kind of growing during the pandemic. Of course, the okay ones are anything in between. But of course, the ones that are problematic, especially within our portfolio companies, would include hospitality and travel. Luckily, one of our portfolio companies, KKday, who is similar to Klook, raised a 75 million Series C, but that took a lot of support and a lot of convincing from a lot of partners to actually get that going. And this is just one of the things that we wanted to highlight, saying it's still business as usual. Technology is supposed to be there to weather out any storm, right? We're supposed to use technology in the digital world to kind of move forward. And it's really highlighted during this time. I'm here based in Indonesia. You see a lot of e-commerce growing, a lot of digital things going as well. I would assume same things in the Philippines as well. So this is what we saw, and this is what we were pushing for, and this is what came true. We want to compare this COVID situation, this pandemic, to what happened in the dot-com crash as well. A lot of companies who came out of it were stronger than ever, like Google. So we are still looking for companies that are still actively trying to push that edge, trying to win their specific verticals, be their market leaders. And we've done a great job in finding some viable candidates, even throughout COVID, to invest in a very, very unpredictable, as Seaman said, everything changes weekly, sometimes even daily, from regulations, from market conditions and everything. So we had to be very careful. We had to look at, what kind of North Star metrics are you tracking? But of course, the main goal for this year was, how do you make money? If you have to pivot, how do you make money? Because in the heart of any business is making money to survive and to grow. And this is what you wanted to do for now. You can focus less on growth in terms of users or click-through rates or anything else, but focus on trying to get money for this year, just to survive. And this is what we told a lot of our portfolio companies, which similar to Riapra, we did a lot of portfolio support this year as well. But going back to kind of the startup side, right? If you do not fall in this, kind of hot category or okay category, there's always a lot of ways for you to benefit as well and try to grow. I mean, for this year alone, for the first half of 2020, based on Cento, the research shows that there was about $5.6 billion invested. This is about 1 billion less than last year, but it's still a lot of activity. VCs are still very actively investing. Startups are still actively fundraising and growing. So there really is still hope for everyone. Depending on your business model, depending on your market, there's still a lot of hope for you guys, just for the people in the audience. So this also is very, very true to what I see as from a deal sourcing standpoint. I doubled my numbers from last year in terms of deals sourced, just because a lot less stealth mode deals this year. And of course, the valuations, as Yunil mentioned, a lot more friendlier valuations for VCs. So a lot more easier to talk to. A lot of good conversations I had this year. So essentially business as usual, but just be on the conservative side and try to push for that revenue. Just make sure you survive this year, then you'll be all right.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great point in terms of just the general scope of VC in relation to every other industry. I mean, you mentioned the 08 crisis, where actually VC on the broad spectrum of things, performed better and was actively investing, compared to a lot of other traditional industries. So I think that's important to highlight to the startup founders out there that like this, they're like you mentioned, very optimistically still hope. Yeah, and I think to your point of just survive until things pick up again. I think that there's also been a shift that I've seen a lot in a lot of startups who pivoted their whole strategy, and now that Pfizer said that there's 90% the spectrum swinging back, and that who knows, planning every week, planning every day, it's almost impossible to anticipate the markets and the movements, but at least it keeps things exciting. So Nadia, I know that you are also a little bit more on the traditional end of the spectrum, as far as Gobi goes, and the breakdown of what you guys, your LP structure, and the way that you guys are investing in your geography. I also know that you guys are in quite some interesting regions as well. So has anything shifted on your end, or what has this period meant for your activity at Gobi?
Yeah, I think so. We actually do seed and Series B. So I guess from the seed perspective, we actually apply more like a Series B kind of lens. So there are, I mean, like in early stage, usually it's about traction, but now we also kind of like really drill on the founder, whether it's actually going to make money or not, right? And then for our, like everyone said as well, we also spend like more time with our portfolio. The deal is actually always there, and then you basically have to ramp up everything and then kind of like market yourself digitally as well. So everything is actually going digital in terms of like what we're looking for. So it's actually more stable revenue. And then I think this is one thing that I felt it's actually being overlooked by early stage founder, is actually hiring a good finance person, because it's actually going to save you a lot during the growth to like a Series A, even like a Series B as well, right? And then the other thing was Of course, we have to invest during like this because the fund structure is already set down and then the fund is already there. But we don't really have there are a number of deals that we have to do. So we are taking our time to actually choose the best deal that we think are going to survive this. So like Christian was asking before as well, like Kumu. So I think that's actually kind of like a great one to actually talk about as well, because everyone is actually staying home. So we also see more deals because our meetings are more efficient. You just kind of go through Zoom call, but you also look for entertaining yourself. You also look for communities that usually you found in offline, like meeting in work. I work in a co-working space, so I usually meet a lot of people when I go to my office, but now I don't really have anyone. So I think Kumu is actually kind of bringing all this, because Filipinos is actually identical with community minded as well. So they find communities online also in the time where everyone cannot meet offline. So that's why it's actually one of the things that we are seeing as a kind of a value differentiator, and also the verticals that we're interested in, something that can grow now and also after this, when people can start going back to work, hanging out offline as well. So I think it's kind of like that, but also just kind of keep in mind that your financial is actually going to matter more in the early stage compared to the later stages. Everyone is actually trying to be more careful than before now.
I think that's, to your point about the finance person, now more than ever, it's, how well are you performing during this time, and what have you done to take steps, what have you cut? I think it also, makes founders sort of sit back and, realize all of the things that they were wasting money on. And to really strip down and to really take stock of, okay, well, that was a massive waste of money. And I think actually startup founders are being smarter and taking it slower, where otherwise, the aggressive strategy may not work during this time, especially as the markets are changing so frequently. So Christian, I know that, we've had quite a year as, entrepreneurial hospitality, where we, thrived off of events. So, how has this period looked for you? And then why don't you go ahead and transition to the next question? A lot of founders were in the space, priorly, we made a business out of traveling entrepreneurs. So, what has this looked like for you? And have you needed funds? What have you done to transition the space? What has this period been?
Yeah, so I think there's basically all you guys gave awesome insights, and there's a couple of ones that I actually resonated with. The one was the intro perspective kind of element. Obviously, what James mentioned about looking at the portfolio and startup founders and entrepreneurs looking back into themselves, taking this time to really see, this is what this is my real passion, where I probably doing this because of a trend, or what I was doing this because of my co-founders or investors. So it was a good time to really get to, the whole uncertainty give you a little more of time to really focus as an entrepreneur. And then the other part is obviously to stay alive. What RJ mentioned about financially, and Nadia, it's a good time to get somebody really good at that. It's definitely something that we're applying. Draper Startup House Manila. I saw it as an opportunity as well, because there's the whole changes that typically take longer is now happen faster. So Sim mentioned a lot of the challenges, the brokers in the Philippines. I believe now with more entrepreneurs, with more of these people pushing in the more digital direction, will bring a lot of more value and accelerate all of those inconsistencies and all of those infrastructure that the Philippines has difficulties with. RJ also mentioned the good buckets of companies like e-commerce. Nadia mentioned the live streaming and the community. All of those ones are great. That has been really starting to gain a lot of momentum here in the Philippines. Obviously, from us on the hospitality perspective, not traveling people to a local community, which is actually good because we want to develop a very strong group of startup founders, entrepreneurs here in Manila and the Philippines. So when the world opens back, we get a lot of people to really, be in an already established community of startup founders here in the Philippines. And actually, one question that I get asked a lot, and this might be a little bit specific to Nadia, because I actually lived 10 years in China before coming here to the Philippines. a lot of people always ask me like, hey, what's the next, like, what is China investing right now here in the Philippines? I mean, they see a lot of the obvious infrastructure kind of deals. They see a lot of like, more of the traditional side, but like you guys, like, Kumu is something that is sort of like in the China reality, like, 5-6 years ago. What are the things that you guys are looking into from that perspective? Because I definitely get asked a lot that, from my China years, like, what are investors looking into the Philippines?
Yeah, I think now China is kind of like a time machine, right? Like something happened there like a couple years ago, and then it's kind of like show up in Southeast Asia. I'm kind of biased. I'm based out of Indonesia, so I felt like the Philippines is actually kind of like similar to Indonesia, where they're saying that it's like the next China and like it's going to be big, right? But every culture, I felt they have like the more kind of like specific and more in follows their own culture as well. So we are looking at a lot of the similar companies, right? Of course, the obvious one like fintech is already really big, right? The e-commerce, the infrastructure as well, and all the digital. Kumu is also kind of like similar in with Live.me in China, right? Food is also a big thing, and then gaming. So I think like at first everyone actually started more into consumer facing companies before they actually started into more B2B. So after like the whole like infrastructure play, like you said, the e-commerces, logistics and payment, they started to do more like consumer focused startup. Food is a big thing. And RJ also said social commerce is also a big thing, right? So everything about communities and consumer, especially, is actually really big in Philippines as well.
Yeah, I see those trends happening. I mean, we see a lot of something that is interesting, and then also for value for our audience here is like, how to differentiate when you're just following trends and then jumping on just following the money, not really like what you feel you're good or have a team and or passion about, and also have that technology. In that sense, RJ, you also mentioned like Jakarta, right, and also India. I sort of like associate like, a little bit ahead than the Philippines in terms of that, and like some trends that later we'll see in the Philippines. Do you agree with that? Is that something that is just maybe a wrong perception from me, or you think like, some of the things that are already happening in Jakarta and those markets are like, starting to be established in the Philippines?
No, I think that's definitely your right assumption. Things in China or also India are starting to pop up here in Indonesia and also in the Philippines as well. You see a lot of investors like the likes of Lightspeed who are actively investing for the whole 1 year in companies that are similar to what they have in India. So they're essentially saying, hey, these market conditions are very similar, and the people are very similar, and even in terms of population, Indonesia being 276, Philippines being close to 110 million people. That's almost the population of America just between those two countries alone. So it's a massive population, similar aspects in terms of familial qualities to community qualities. So I did want to highlight specifically the model of social commerce, which has been pretty hot lately. This is the Udaan model in India, the Pindodo model in China. A way to save on costs from logistics to everything if you're buying group buying, essentially, which is a very core, very cool concept. At the moment, you have the e-commerce boom is still there. Shopee, Lazada still doing great, but then the whole point of group buying is to have this social aspect to it as well. And since we are all of our nations in Southeast Asia are quite social, it just makes sense for a model that works so well in China and India to kind of thrive over here as well. Albeit a lot of the companies at the moment are still quite early, so we're still seeing who is going to be the market leader, who's going to be the top one, top two. Are they going to be specific local leaders, or are they going to be regional leaders? So still very early to tell, but very interesting to see how these models from India and China are taking over slowly in our region.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of scenarios, and I love the Pinduoduo and all of those models. I actually used to be one of convincing my friends to get that bottle of wine to get it cheaper. So I can definitely see that happening in the Philippines. So what about you, James? I know you're from the Philippines. What would be your advice? You mentioned about the introspective angle, like for Filipino startup founders, like what can they focus on their energy and resources right now in this time, and like not jump into just the new trend, but also something that they feel like it's the right thing to do for them as founders.
You know, the great thing about the Philippine startup ecosystem is that the founders have a real natural passion towards some of these ideas that actually address the infrastructure issues in one way or another. You know, there are what people would consider boring products. There's a company called Texumo, and I think one of the founders is actually speaking in one of the events here in Startup Week, and we love them because they're giving SMEs an opportunity to comply with tax obligations and still function, so they too can be great companies in the future. I've met a lot of Filipino founders over the past few months, still dabbling in agriculture of many scales, trying to either change the foundational aspects of agriculture despite the lack of agrarian reform, and others trying to do something, starting off smaller, farm to table, working with independent growers. And I guess the other space would be like education as well. So with education, with agriculture, with enabling SMEs through startups that focus on tax payment platforms, for example, these are areas that I think it really is a pain point that they feel. Like I'm talking about the emotional pain, and you see it with these founders, right? And I would say that even if there's going to be some casualties along the way, the great thing about the Philippine ecosystem is that they're very strong in community. And so if one fails, someone's going to step up, or they're going to find another way to continue to be involved, to change the infrastructure, either in big sweeps or in small steps. And that's what I like. And so I love those founders who are approaching us from the Philippines with those
Yeah, I
types of
think we've
ideas.
seen, like, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of painful news about a lot of the farming being waste, right? A lot of disconnect between the supply chains and all of these products getting to the consumer. So there's some good companies and some entrepreneurs helping develop that. But I guess that we talked a lot about infrastructure, and I think Jan and Neil can bring a little more of like tech sides on this. Like Jan, I know Funderbeam, Estonia, digital. You guys are ahead the curve. In terms of that, what would be like all of your advice of what Funderbeam has from Estonian perspective, and the inefficiencies that we have discussed about the bureaucracy or some of those like physical infrastructure that hopefully, I mean, same as we mentioned at the beginning, like first time I heard about Kumu, like I heard like this live stream platform in the country with such a bad internet, like how is that going to work? But it's working. So there's some hope, and there's space for some of the things that you guys are being good at, from that perspective.
Yeah, I am a Malaysian and I'm based in Singapore, so I won't speak for Estonia. But the infrastructure point is pretty interesting, right? Because one thing I noticed is that founders that pay very close attention to the consumer journey, the customer journey, they do very well, because and that shows in a couple of ways, right? Like one of it is that there's a growing kind of like a vertically integrated platforms. So like specific to the vertical, it goes up and down the supply chain. And what happens is the founder understands the customer journey, from the start, when they are like maybe just buying electronics, to how they take care of the electronics, to how they fix the electronics. So I think paying attention to the customer journey translates to a different kind of business model, a vertically integrated platform, which actually is kind of similar to infrastructure as well. Because when you think about buying something, what comes with that, could they be taking a loan? Then what's the infrastructure that you provide to make it easy for people to apply for a loan, get a loan, and things like that. So from the consumer angle, a vertically integrated platform that tracks the customer journey is interesting. Another one I noticed is actually consumer brands as well. I think people are becoming more discerning about the things that they buy, the things that they consume. They want to know where it comes from. So I think building a brand, consumer brand, to target a very specific niche of customers, I think that is exciting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the customer-centric side is more important, especially now with all the uncertainty and changes. What about you, Neil? what is your experience on like going back into this sort of like infrastructure sort of challenges? I would say it's regional. It tends to be quite common in the Philippines more than other countries. But yes, what is your insights on that?
Oh, well, as other panels already talked, the patterns are actually repeatedly happening in Southeast Asia, one by one, and the Philippines is also uh, having and facing a lot of challenges and opportunities, I see. So if you talk about the infrastructure nowadays, everything is kind of like everything as a service kind of approach. So even like in the perspective of digital transformation and open innovation types of the solutions that you focused, and then actually the startup driven infrastructure reconstruction or redefinition can be happening, and that is actually what we are also experiencing in Korea and experience and also now experiencing as well. So I think the tech literacy and the accessibility of the deep tech and all the tech advantages all same in all over the world, because we are all connected on online, right? So you guys can solve a lot of like infrastructure level of problems utilizing this blockchain systems and some other server systems and those kind of like tech advantages that you can utilize. So it's not kind of like a physical transformation, but more like a transformation from the user perspectives and the consumer perspectives, and giving the creative solutions as a startup. Then that's the start point of actually reshaping the world you are in, actually. So that's I think that's the entrepreneur's what can I say,
Yeah.
duty for the world. And definitely, yeah, to share the emphasize on the impact is pretty well formed as well. So combining the two, like giving the positive impact back to the society, and also building a robust infrastructure, utilizing this digital arms and weapons, then it will be a kind of like a big opportunities for the startups who want to start building those kind of systems.
Yeah, I think that's great insights. Obviously in the Philippines, like for instance, when you guys mentioned earlier about education, still today, like a lot of the education not fully been reactivated, and there's a lot of projects going on with different entities into trying to access. Access has been one of the main issues. Comes back to infrastructure. So I think this is a great time, and it's great that we're having this discussion, and it's great that Philippine Startup Week is happening, so that way like more people jump on board and try to talk about these issues and how to solve it, because kids not being back to school until now and not being able to figure out like a better system for them to learn is it's something that we as entrepreneurs and as investors can definitely help bridge those gaps. In line with that, Simin, like with your startup, how is it going on when with that infrastructure element that you mentioned at the beginning, and you've been using the hardware side and newer technology in that sense to target more social people with disadvantages that will be able to even have a solution like lighting and some of those
Yeah.
basic needs.
Exactly. I think COVID and also the fact that technology advancement has really helped us to answer the why now question. We are in fact solving for an infrastructural challenge, and we've seen like electrification effort really ramp up in the Philippines and in Southeast Asia over the last 3 years. Right, there really has been significant progress, but now we're targeting this last mile delivery, last mile electrification that has really stalled for a long time. But if you we're using solar technologies in order to get access to energy in rural communities. And what hasn't been very apparent to a lot of people is that the cost of solar has really dramatically reduced. And also at the same time, Philippines is a great market for community sharing kind of utilities. So when you get a community to share kind of solar capex cost, it's actually commercially viable, even VC investable to some extent, to bring a solution like energy and Wi-Fi onto the market. I think James really brought up a super interesting point because you talked about how entrepreneurs, not just entrepreneurs, Filipinos in general, are highly resourceful. When we first launched our product and we realized that lockdown happened in Cebu, we can't actually launch a prototype even though it has been funded. And we can't get access to prepaid card because we're using a prepaid card to allow a family to act like an internet cafe for the vicinity that they have. What happens is that we set up an access point at my founder's home, and it's a really long pole, 40 meters long. And we use microtech simulation to understand, okay, if we put it 40 meters high, how far can we reach in the surrounding village around Lapu-Lapu city? And then we called out somebody we know at the village and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to send you this device. Could you set this up in your house? And let's see from a point-to-point perspective, can the two talk to one another? So we didn't have the prepaid SIM card because the deliveries was not running. But we used my co-founder's house internet to ping the internet access to the village nearby. And then we realized that it works. And we were able to, in 1 month during lockdown, we were able to deploy and say that, hey, we have data points that could test our value proposition. So I say that it's not just the founders that are resourceful because this just came randomly out of nowhere, but that Filipinos, especially the ones who are much poorer, they are very hands-on people, highly technical. And one of the challenges we were getting was, how are you going to make yourself scale? Because when the unit breaks down, how are you going to fix it? You can't send somebody there, it's super expensive. But in modern days, and because I sometimes don't even know how to change my light bulb, it's a very valid question to ask, right? But the community and the culture in Philippines is completely different. You break your bike, they fix it, right? Very hands-on people. So to James's point, I really agree that not just the entrepreneurs, but the community is very resourceful. I think from a founder's perspective, we launched our startup in such a terrible time during June, right? When lockdown happened. But never in my lifetime within the entrepreneurship world has I ever seen so much help and so much resources given to founders. All of the mentorship sessions, Cocoon launching the mentorship for female founders. You've got a lot of VCs offering time that would have been crazy billable hours to help founders. There are so many people I know that I've gotten an audience with time and time again who sat down for an hour just to listen to my pitch, help me shape it. I think that now, even though it's very challenging, but the community spirit is extremely strong. I've never seen so much support ever given freely and given at in the extent of all of your time. So really appreciative of that. But the last point I will touch on is the fact that now is also a great time to find cheap resources. There's a lot of layoffs, a lot of great talent out in the market. I remember when COVID hit, I was still at Future Labs Ventures, and a group of us came together and launched this thing called Ecosystem. So basically a spreadsheet in order to help people who are laid off find a job. But those, if you look at the list, there were great talent being laid off, looking for ad hoc projects. So we jumped on that opportunity, found a CTO, really think outside the box, right? There are a lot of headwinds, but even in those conditions, you will find a lot of tailwinds as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree on the whole element of the community. I think besides we probably like the rest in politics, we've seen a lot of polarized. I think like us as a community, as entrepreneurs, and it's been more helpful. We've seen it a lot of spaces, offering more of the resources that they have that are underutilized, like just putting out for free. And opening up the doors and helping more of entrepreneurs and looking more local and looking more back to what you have close to you, as you mentioned, like, the resources, the materials, the things that you can do with what you have in Cebu, what you have there, and like probably you didn't figure out that that was the solution. That applies to, right, like different other levels of, like, higher up technology or community. But yeah, I definitely see, that whole element of like trying to, connect more with humanity, and that's something that definitely we at Draper Startup Houses is sort of what we want to build. A community of people that are diverse, that are, believe in entrepreneurship as, the tools to drive progress. And that's what we working on, and hopefully, we get to pass by this COVID scene and, like, get back to the whole expansion plan that we had. That being said, I think we got about 20-30 minutes left. So Juliana, you want to maybe lead on the closing statement, or like, what other advice, or what do you think it's valuable for our audience and the investors?
Yeah, I think, for the most part, it's been very helpful. And I think there's a lot of really good points said about, the education and the scalability, and, how does, the founder in Manila get access to capital? How do they grow in the region? How do you, Simon, have access to opportunity? How do you grow? In a community that is, fast growing and community oriented, but lacks infrastructure, and all of these major elements as well. So, I think at least what I've seen in this process from, founders in Manila specifically, that are, looking to expand. Southeast Asia is a region that's really quite tough to begin with, right? It's one of the fastest growing. Indonesia's massive, Philippines is massive, but we have Singapore, right next to Malaysia, and Laos and Cambodia, which are all vastly different markets. So I did want to ask a question, Simon, sort of, what would be helpful for you as a founder, where you have a lot of investors on this call. What is our role in the ecosystem for these, emerging markets? What does that look like for us to be able to support, not only in the Philippines, but in all of these emerging markets?
I think it's a great question, and a great time to ask for help. But more speaking on behalf of other entrepreneurs, I had the opportunity of being part of the corporate world and coming in from Future-led Ventures, where we already had to take on a VC hat. But there are a lot of entrepreneurs, especially in a young ecosystem, where you're trying to, there's a lot of mentorship that is needed. If it doesn't come from the state, then there's a lot of room for private companies like you guys is to play a role in educating and helping entrepreneurs to grow. I think what has been extremely helpful for me, I've always been building tech companies, and it's the first time I'm going into hardware. But the fact that I had an audience and time and resources being made available to help me in my initial journey has been immensely. It has really accelerated my thinking a lot. And more so than not, it is a level of due diligence for the VCs yourself, because we incorporated in June, right? So we're 4 months old. It's quite unlikely that anybody's going to invest in us at 4 months old. But being so close to VCs and keeping the contact close also allows a VC to be able to see how quickly the founders will be able to pivot. Even if it means like 30 minutes of your time once a month, the scale of that connection and the level of progress that is made was what kept a lot of impact VCs actually on my end quite close. They continue asking me, hey, how's the progress? I don't know, is it because I got lucky or more because during COVID, people are a lot more giving. But I felt that was so much help on the one hand, real intelligent insights as to what VCs are looking at. But also at the same time, that was so much encouragement in a time when things are just really a huge struggle. And we are in impact startups, so we see people's stories and people's lives changing, and that keeps us alive and keeps us going. But we also need to have the industry believe in us that you're solving the right problem and you're doing the right thing. And that level of encouragement has been really helpful. I can only say from a very early stage perspective, of course, once you get into the A round, once you get into the B round, private VC capital is really important to fight off the competition that is the incumbents on the ground, right? Right now, especially in emerging markets, maybe incumbents are a little bit like licking their wounds. They're trying to figure out what to do next. They're trying to figure out the new normal. So things are, there isn't a lot of direct competition and resources thrown into squeezing out competition. But consolidation is happening, and without the level of support, then as a very small player, you just get absorbed and you disappear. So maybe that would be my ask.
I think that's the really also great point in terms of like the stage of the company as well, because I mean, even the earliest stage of ideation, right? This is arguably the most critical point, because if you can't get past this, then you don't survive anywhere. So it's being able to have that support and the education, which arguably what Christian mentioned is a sort of a valley of hopping back and forth, and how to get started, and those people, resources, and how do they get there, how do they sort of get past the point of we have an idea but we need to take it to the next point. So RJ, what is your overall advice to the startup, and the very early stage startup in Manila who's maybe looking to expand and have access to other opportunity? What is your advice to that founder?
Well, I do want to begin with, the Filipino people. We get hit with typhoons every year, so I do want to bring this example to kind of the startup scene as well. Filipinos are probably the most resilient people on earth. The resiliency is unparalleled. They just keep fighting, they keep persevering. So this is exactly what you should do, given such a very, very young tech market. Be perseverant. Just keep fighting. Try to be as independent as possible. As Seaman said, don't try to get pulled in by corporates. But of course, if that does make sense, it's not a bad thing as well. Reach out to people who are on the ground, like accelerators, incubators. For example, like Kubo. They do a great job to connect people and also get some mentorship from us. All of us who probably spoke at a Kubo event at one point in our lives. So reach out, persevere, be resilient, and just keep at it.
I think that's great advice, and I think the keeping at it is during this time applicable to everybody, not even just those that are in business. But
right.
What about you, James? What is your advice to those looking to scale, looking for capital, looking for the next step, looking who have no idea how to do any of this?
Right. I think I can offer a slightly counterintuitive response, which I don't think is mutually exclusive from the things that RJ or Nadia would be suggesting, because we come from a different approach. I completely agree. I would probably say the number one thing right now is figure out how to make money. And a good balance sheet is a good balance sheet. You're a healthy business under any business module in any business school around the world, no matter how small or how big you are. And I don't mean it just in case, just in terms of the context of the crisis. I mean it in terms of actually we can diversify the ways that we look at venture capital moving forward. We will still have the Monks Hills and the Gobies doing what they do, which is really good for the ecosystem. We can have alternative means that are actually pushed by founders who are saying, we want to slow it down. Maybe we decide not to fundraise. Maybe we don't want the scale, or at least the rate of scale that you would typically find in companies 10 years ago in a specific space. In that sense, we can create buckets of how venture-backed companies are changing, the way we look at pace, the way we look at growth, the way we look at maybe even maintaining good balance sheets throughout, and using cash to experiment for the growth of the company versus just thinking about the next round of fundraising. Not mutually exclusive, but another perspective that is a blessing in disguise for companies in the crisis, and not just because of the crisis, but because it might be a good thing for the long term post-COVID.
Yeah, and I think more than anything, there are 1,000,010 ways now to fund your company. I mean, look at the panel. We have an accelerator, we have a private stock exchange for startups. We have traditional VC, and even for us, we're a syndicate that partners from everyone from consultancies all the way to debt funds, depending on what you're looking for and what is going to get you to that next point. So I think that point of just make money any way that you can until you find something that works will ultimately is the only way to keep you alive, right? And I don't think fundraising is always the answer, and takes a lot of time and energy, where I think truthfully, if you took that time and energy and maybe focused on a better product, like product market fit, maybe you'd be way better off than the 6 months it takes to just look for outside help. So I think that's actually like a really, really solid piece of advice as well. John, what is your advice to the founders in Manila who are looking to escalate or survive or get to that next point?
Yeah. So I think one of the things about Philippines I noticed is also the pace. A lot of the success of the company depends on things that might be outside your control. So like to draw an example from RJ, right, to talk about typhoons. So things like regulators and infrastructure. So I think like when you build your company, right, think of the building blocks and how each of these building blocks can move, because it's a very nuanced market. So the way you approach each building blocks is going to be very different from the rest of Southeast Asia. It'll be very Philippine specific.
Thanks, John. And yeah, no, honestly, like very specific to each market. Again, Southeast Asia is, amazing and growing, but very, very different. So any last words for the founders in Manila looking to thrive?
Oh well, I agree with all of other panels already mentioned. Like you have a lot of different measures and actions to take when you think about scale and growth of your business. Like well, as James told you, like there are a lot of like alternatives that you can take rather than VC. And even like among VCs and accelerators, there are a lot of experimental new approaches are coming out as well. So you can choose. Actually, this is kind of like a heaven for the entrepreneurs. So now the market is pretty mature, and a lot of different experiments and approaches are coming out. So you can choose whatever familiar and comfortable measures that you want to take. So it can be from the public side of the assistance, like grant style, and it can be total equity financing, and it can be a blended way of mixing the two, or it can be an exit to community, like building a strong community, and those community actually fitting your company to grow, and and others as well, like having very, very strong and diversified business model. That means you will thrive without any outside of the financing model. So you can be creative, and if you can define yourself and your business's nature and authenticity, then that is the first step, and then you can think about the best fit or the best partner who can grow together. And it's not just about the money, and it's not about getting another name on your cap table, but more like it's seeking for a right partner. And there are a lot of different types of partners available at the market, and that kind of like ecosystem and community support that we really, really want to provide for all other entrepreneurs in a lot of different nations. So yeah, and also you can hack the systems, like utilizing this chance. Everything is online right now, so everything is done remotely. So the resources are open, and the list of names and the list of contacts are open too. And sometimes it feels like no privacy, right? So just you can utilize all the networks available, and they are also happy to help you out at any time.
Amazing point, especially to the grants and the alternative ways to be creative when you're looking to restructure to Nadi's point of having a finance person and just overall the resources out there to get educated about how to potentially make this easier for you, so you run into less hurdles, even with there's enough hurdles out there that if it's in your control, then to do the creative thought process and to do the research and to how to structure you in a way that makes sense. Nadia, any last words for Manila entrepreneurs?
I think it's probably it's a great time to actually build a startup. Actually, probably ending it in a positive note. I think it's a great time because everything's changing. So like the bigger players, they were pretty big in the post before COVID world, but it's probably not going to be the same after. So it's a great time to actually do a startup. If you want to quit your job and like build something on your own and then create a new world. So I think this is the time. So find people who are still investing, who did invest in this year as well, and probably ask them for advice and knock all the doors that you have. Everything's more efficient nowadays anyways.
No, I think that's
it from me.
also amazing in the sense of, now is the time while, more or less, for lack of a better phrase, the herd is being thinned, and there are a lot of room for new entrants. For a lot of companies have consolidated. There's a lot of movement happening where it also exposes a lot of new opportunity and things. And like delivery logistics. There's a bunch of new ways and new problems for people that now have. It's created a whole new array of issues to be solved. And where some other opportunity might not have continued, but I think it just opens a new door. And now is the time when you're working at home. I mean, people are monitoring you every day, so spend more time on your side projects. Probably bad advice, but hey. All right, Christian, what about you? Any last advice? I know we're coming down to the minute here.
Yeah, no, I agree with what everybody pretty much said. Yeah, I think we can work very efficient now. We cannot complain about Manila traffic or Jakarta traffic anymore. We can just do all of these calls and like be more efficient, get into more meetings and have this big group of panel and people in the same place. I'm sure you guys been able to be more efficient, join more of these sessions, and definitely before was different world. Now we have to utilize these new resources and more people being used to learning how to use all of these platforms, communication and all of that in our advantage. And then in line with I know was saying about the pivot and being creative. Like I totally agree with that. I think that's what we've been doing overall at Draper Startup House. And as long as we stay true to our mission, I think the rest of what you guys were mentioning about also like being financially sustainable and all of that is super important. But yeah, I think like my advice is stay true to your mission. Do the pivots, the tweaks that needs to be done. But being true to your mission is what's going to motivate the rest of your team to all pull in the same direction. If we just sort of follow trends or pivot into ways that maybe derail us from our purpose, then it will be a little bit harder to get everybody on board and push in the same direction. And this meaning in every sense, right? Like for the partners, for the investors, for the team that you build. I think that's very important. And to be honest, that's what I think has kept us also as a hospitality, as a hostel project, to still be here and keep our doors open. That's definitely one of the major things that had helped us navigate this bunch of storms, COVID and typhoons in the Philippines.
Yeah. So I think, overall, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. I know it's kind of late our time, but I'm so very pleased that all of you guys were able to join us. I think this was a fantastic conversation with a lot of different multitudes of opinions and perspectives from, founders and people who have done this before and those who are just, investing in some cool concepts. And I think more than all, a few takeaways are, you can be creative. More than anything, investors are still investing. It's a great time to build. Obviously, there's challenges. There will be challenges everywhere. There's challenges in the States. There's challenges in Europe. There's challenges in Asia. But I think, you can be smart about which challenges that you can control, which that those you cannot. And, more than anything, now's a great time. And thank you guys. Christian, I don't know if you have any other closing remarks, but I really appreciate those to Kubo and the Impact Collective and anyone who's listening, and obviously our speakers. So thanks so much.
Yeah. I think closing is to thank you guys. Really appreciate you guys being here. Hopefully this also help you get more the word out of your companies, and get more people to knock your doors with some interesting projects. I will be putting more information about all of you guys, and keep promoting what you guys been doing. And yes, thank you for being here, and thank you, Kubo. Thank you, DOST, DTI, DICT, all of you guys. Thanks for making this happen. And first day of Flipping Startup Week. I think it's going to be a very interesting week. So can't wait to see the rest of the sessions.